The first story, a man in the swamp. The next story happened to me personally. I don't know if there's any mysticism in it, but it was not a laughing matter at the time. My wife and I like to ride our bikes at night. Not only around the city, but also out of town with normal bike lights. It's not a problem. Once we decided to sit by a lake and make a fire. We found a body of water on the map about 15 kilometers from the outskirts of the city. To get to it, we had to drive along the highway for 12 kilometers. Then turn onto a country road and then go through the forest to get to the lake. Yes. Let's face it, the idea was great at first. The highway was fine, although the trucks on the road were annoying, always rushing past. But when we got to the turn to the country road, we realized that it hadn't been used for a long time. Everything was overgrown and it was barely visible, but whatever, we went on. We got to the forest and it was dark. If you turn off the lights, you can't see a damn thing. It was scary, but not enough to turn back. We reached the lake. It turned out that if it was a lake, it was in the time of the pharaohs. Now it was just a swamp. We didn't want to make a campfire in such conditions. So we decided to turn off the lights for a minute, listen to the forest around us, and then go back. We turned them off, and then we listened. And then we heard some kind of crackling, as if someone was walking through the woods nearby. Branches crunching underfoot, and it seems as if the footsteps are approaching. And from different directions. We discuss this loudly with each other, and decide to turn on the flashlight on one of the bikes. And what happened next was just like in a typical horror movie, except that we didn't film it. In short, my bike was facing the lake with its handlebars toward the lake, the beam of the flashlight. Accordingly, it shone right there. It turned out that there was not much water in front of us, maybe 30 to 40 meters, and then the swamp became shallow with bushes and small trees. And there, near the trees, is a man. He was wearing black pants or jeans and a coat. He is standing sideways to us and is covering his face with his hand because the light from our flashlight is hitting him in the face. And we are standing there, not even knowing what to say. Later, we seem to come to our senses and discuss what we saw. The guy must have heard us and obviously seen us, but he did nothing at all. He just stood there sideways and covered his face with his palm. He did not move, did not try to leave, did not say anything to us. He was just standing there. Then we heard that the cracking of the branches did not disappear, but only intensified and began to approach even faster, as if someone thought that there was no point in hiding. Since we could see everything anyway, what can I say? We jumped on our bikes and ran back as fast as we could. Even if someone was chasing us, we couldn't see them, and there was no time to turn around. I think that if we hadn't been on our bikes, it's not clear how it would have ended. I still have no idea what this man in normal city clothes was doing at night in the pitch black. In the center of a swamp in the forest 15 kilometers from the city, there are not even any villages nearby. And there is no normal road. You can't drive a car into the swamp. And who else was with him is also a question, and why he didn't react to us in any way. And in general, before we turned on the flashlight, it was completely dark. Whatever he was doing there. The question remains, how could he see at all? He definitely had no light sources. Otherwise, we would have noticed. Alternatively, he heard us approaching before we reached the swamp and turned off the light. It's a long shot. But the memories of that night are still haunting. Second story, something in the forest. This incident happened during a nighttime bike ride. And even in about the same place, except a little closer to the city. We found a real lake where we could sit on the shore. But that's not the point. In general, we were going to go back. It was pitch black at night. A country road with a forest on the sides, no one around, complete silence. We are driving quietly and at some point we hear the cracking of branches to our right. In the forest, it is so loud. that it seems as if someone is breaking through the bushes and undergrowth without looking at the road, and the sound is getting closer and closer to us, meaning that the speed of this something is clearly higher than ours. And when it got very close, the sound was accompanied by a visual, the branches of bushes and trees on the side of the road to our right were shaking and walking, and there, behind them, we could hear heavy breathing and stomping. We picked up the speed, but the thing kept up. Although it didn't try to run out onto the road dot, it followed us for maybe 2 kilometers. And then it stopped abruptly. At the time, I thought it was a moose of some kind. They are powerful and healthy animals, and can run for all I care. But it was still strange that it was running straight through the bushes, not trying to turn either further into the forest or onto the road. It was a bit scary, after all. The third story, apartment number 13. This story is the nightmare of my childhood. For most of my school life, I lived with my parents in a one-room apartment in an old 2-story building. I didn't complain, but it had its own peculiarities. For example, the fact that a woman lived in the apartment across the hall at the time. She seemed like an old lady to me, but she must have been about 50 years old. It's funny, but she lived in apartment number 13, such a banal cryptic stamp from real life. I would never have written this in a story number 13. Really? But in life, look what happens. So her apartment was on the same floor as mine. Right across the street, I had the 16th floor, even before we moved into that house. A neighbor became famous for hiding her mother's corpse in her apartment for a week. The old woman simply died of old age, but her daughter lived on as if nothing had happened. It was only when the whole building began to stink that the neighbors called the police. They opened the apartment and found a decomposing body on the couch. They say that the downstairs neighbors even had stains on the ceiling, because all this stuff was flowing onto the floor of the unfortunate apartment. But I can't vouch for that. The neighbor was put in a psychiatric hospital. The whole building wrote a statement. Her son, who had long lived separately, also agreed. But just a few months later she returned. She seemed to be much more adequate than before. But then it started again when we moved into the apartment. She was already starting to do strange things. She said that various things were disappearing from her apartment glasses, for example, which she always wore, even asking me to look for them with her, saying that she could not see well. At first, her neighbors responded, but they did not find anything missing from her apartment. Then she began to claim that she saw her things being stolen by scary devils who came at night. That's when it became more scary for me and at least the rest of the neighborhood kids. It only got worse from there. She started talking to these devils, and we could hear it perfectly well. At that time, we, the little ones, often liked to play in the entrance on the staircase, so it was easy to understand the neighbor's screams. She was actually having dialogues, asking someone to leave her alone, and so on. She would swear, scream, cry, but then everything would calm down. Later, it got to the point where she was afraid to return to the apartment. She went to the neighbors in conversations. Apart from the topic of devils, she behaved absolutely adequately. Stayed at work longer as if she were a janitor. Then the hysteria started. She was screaming and howling in the apartment, both day and night. Her sanity evaporated before our eyes when she left the apartment. She would carry all kinds of heresy, yell at us, and be frightened by every shadow. It all ended with her being sent to a psychiatric hospital again, after she went to a parent-teacher meeting at her grandson's school and started something unfortunately. I don't know what exactly, but it must have been serious if everyone started to file a complaint again. I even remember how they wrote in the statement that she had already become a threat to children and so on. Well, to be honest, we, the children, were really afraid of her. Who knows what she would do? after she left for the white wards with the nurses. Her son invited a priest and blessed the apartment. About a year later, the neighbor came back again, sane again. But she became very devout. She even embroidered icons all the time. The devilry seemed to stop and, strangely enough, even the neighbors stopped shying away from this woman and started communicating again. I moved out of that house a long time ago, but I live not far away and I know that the woman is still alive and still in the same apartment. I have seen her many times. She is still absolutely sane. Not a single gram of madness or strangeness, only very old. I don't know whether it was psychosis or she was going crazy. Or the devils were really going crazy in the apartment, or maybe all of the above. But it all looked frightening, to put it mildly, to be here.